This conference will now be recorded.
I call to order the June 28th, 2023 Area Board of Zoning Appeals of Tippecanoe County meeting. First item on the agenda is the roll call.
Steve Clevenger.
Present.
Gary Schroeder.
Present.
Tom Andrew.
Present.
Robert Novak.
Present.
Michelle Dennis. Ed Butts. Present. Dustin Grove.
Present.
Quorum present.
Thank you. Briefing session.
All cases are ready to go, with the exception of our two continuances. Both BZA 2104 Archview Properties and BZA 2111 Tomish Developers LLC are continued to the August 23rd meeting.
Thank you. I will take a motion approving the minutes of our last meeting on May 24th.
I move to approve the minutes from the May 24th, 2023 ABZA public hearing as submitted.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any corrections or comments? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And I'll go ahead and, let's see, we'll do new business.
Shall I go
And
ahead?
Eric, if you want to.
Sure. I will be brief and then open it up to questions. We have a ballot in your packet. As you know, we've made a change previously to the ballot, and I think this is a continued refinement. Recall that when you take your actions, it is required to be in writing. That's why we have ballots. That's why it's not a show of hands. And the law is very clear that in order for a reviewing court, if it ever got to a court, a reviewing court is going to want to know that there was sufficient facts that were determined by this body, because you, as you know, are quasi-judicial body. You have the ability to use a great deal of discretion in your decision-making, and that discretion is very broad, very strong. You're going to be supported in almost every case unless the written documentation that would be put before a judge if there was ever a challenge, if it's insufficient somehow. That's how someone would successfully challenge. Not easy to challenge your findings because you are quasi-judicial, and that means you're going to exercise a great deal of discretion. And so what I've been working with the staff on is to make sure that we get the ballot to be as user-friendly and as helpful if we ever get into a court situation as possible. And so if you take a look at the changes that have been made, a lot of it's going to look very similar to you, but what I would like everyone to understand is that when you make your decision, to the extent that you are able to put your thinking on this form in writing, that's going to be a very good thing. It's a very important thing, particularly if there's ever a challenge. And sometimes other organizations that I've seen their ballots, it's just such a check-the-box kind of thing that it really is not helpful. So if a reviewing court was looking at it and it's just a check the box, I agree or I disagree, the judge doesn't have anything to sink his teeth into. And the kinds of things that this ballot does is it refers you so that you can use it when you look at the report, and it would refer a court to facts. The main facts that you're going to see are going to be found in the petitioner's application, and that's something we'll talk about, and we could probably just as easily talk about it now. There's been a form change. Is it in the ballot, or is it in the packet? So the form change is just a much more user-friendly document that a petitioner is going to fill out in the beginning. And part of what they're filling out is these are the findings that we, or I, the petitioner, believe support our request. And so you're going to have in the report, starting next month, there will be an attachment, and that attachment will be the actual form that has been filled out by the petitioner with all of their thinking on it, so that you can look at the petitioner's findings as part of the report, and if you like some of those, you're going to adopt some of those. Maybe you'll adopt all of them. So that's the kind of thing that if the judge sees that you have checked the box based on petitioner's written findings of fact, I'm looking now at the ballot, then the judge is going to pick up that same piece of paper and say, oh, well, they looked at these facts and they consider these facts. Same thing on this ballot on the staff's written findings of fact. You can rely on the staff's written finding of fact also, and this would direct a reviewing court's attention to the fact that if you check that box, that's what you were using. And then, finally, if you're hearing all this, and you look at the petitioners, and you look at what the staff has said, but you decide, I think there's something that's important that hasn't really been brought up, that's where you would write it in yourself. And so if you see something that you think is important, you just check the box, put it in there. You could check all those boxes. They're not always going to be completely inconsistent. You understand what I'm saying? Because this is going to be a yes vote. So if you're giving a yes vote, you'll sometimes have a contrary staff opinion. Sometimes you'll have one in favor. And so I would encourage you to look through this, and particularly next month when you see the new form that's going to be used at the end of the report, that you look at that and kind of line it up with this. Same thing if you're going to vote against something. You would vote against something because of the staff's written findings of fact, or based on facts that you believe are important yourself. It would be inconsistent to say that you're relying on the petitioner's request in saying no. That's why we don't have that one there. That would be an inconsistent result, is, I think I'm voting against it, and it's based on what the petitioner wanted. Well, that doesn't make any sense. So again, this is just an attempt to focus your attention so that you can spend your time looking at the reports before, listening to the evidence, and then deciding what on the ballot is most applicable to what you believe is true. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions about
I
this
guess we
ballot.
need to officially adopt this ballot.
Did we,
Is this part of the bylaws, or?
not specifically?
No, the ballot is not part of the bylaws.
So
I
we
agree.
So we do not officially need to adopt this, or would you like us to?
I think I would like us to do so. It doesn't have to become part of the bylaws, but you're going to be using it, and so if you like it, I'd like you to approve it. We're using the old ballot for tonight's meeting, okay? And so, to the extent that you look at this new ballot that's in your packet, you think it's a good one, you don't have any questions, you could certainly, just with a motion, a second, and a vote, approve it for use for the next meeting. You could wait to the next meeting if you want to have more time to look at it. So totally up to you. We're just trying to refine. There's no hurry. There's no emergency. And so we can go at whatever pace you're comfortable with.
I mean, if somebody would like to make a motion, if we're comfortable, and then we can discuss it, and then we can always put it off to the next meeting if people aren't comfortable.
I move that we accept the new ABZA ballot as presented by Mr. Burns and contained in the packet.
Second?
Have a motion and a second. So any comments?
It may be minute, but I see this ballot, we have big boxes. This box has little boxes, and
That's true.
Yeah.
it's just,
Yeah.
I don't know if you'd get those confused. but I don't know if you could make those
I
a
bet we
little bit
could.
bigger.
It would be nice to have
You're right.
slightly bigger boxes
Yeah,
if
you're right.
if staff can handle that. I guess I'd have a question and then a comment. I'm assuming that if you check more than one, for instance, if staff and the petitioner do not, you can't check both of them if staff and petitioner do not agree.
Well, you've got 5 or 7, right?
Right.
Different findings, and so there could be some from each that you would agree with, depending on whether the staff was in favor or against.
Right, but if staff, for instance, was against, and the petitioner's most likely always going to be in favor.
He's going to always be in favor.
But if staff was against due to one finding, I would think that you would just select the petitioners and not the staff's, because you've got a contrary, on one of the findings is not consistent.
Depending on what the staff
Right.
said on that finding, because it's not unusual to have 4 out of the 5 that the staff says, we agree with petitioner, and right on down the line. So, I think.
Right,
I
but
think-
but if one of them was, they do not agree with the petitioner
Yeah.
based on this,
Yeah,
then I don't think we would check that box if we voted in favor of it, just because, even though we agree with staff on the 4 findings that they agreed with the petitioner on, but if the one's opposite, I think we would just vote on the one that the petitioner.
yeah, I think if you are inclined to vote yes, you're going to look at the petitioners first and see, well, I must agree with these, right? So you go through
Right.
it, and then if you see, I'm just picking on number 2, just as an example, you look at number 2 and go, the petitioner said it was this or that. The staff has a different fact that also supports number 2.
Right.
I like their fact better. I think theirs makes more sense. And so you could mix and match. Again, the risk is when you mix and match, as you just
Right,
kind of
if
cautioned
it
against.
goes to a judge to review,
If
they're
you-
not going to know our thought behind, well, number 2, we like staff's number 2 better than petitioner's
Right.
number 2, but staff's number 5 is against what the petitioner had. I think you would have to put it under based on these
Amen.
findings of facts rather than checking the
Well, and
staff's.
that's kind of my point, is if you wanted to get that far into the weeds, you
Right.
would use that 3rd box, and you would check it and say, agree with staff number 3,
Yeah.
or something along those
And
lines.
I guess another question I have, based on these findings of fact, does that have to be something that is presented at the meeting? I'm assuming it does, because we're weighing.
It does.
So you can't, it's
You
not
do-
your opinion, and it's your opinion based on what has been presented.
Yeah, like in all court-type proceedings, you look at what is presented to you, okay? The petitioner presents things, staff presents things, the members of the audience present things, and your charge is to make your decision based on what is presented to you. That doesn't mean that you give up all common sense and that
Right.
I'm going to forget that that's a two-lane road, but in general, your focus should be on what's presented in this meeting as part of the cases that are being presented
Correct.
by everybody involved.
So you can't make up your own findings when you're filling out the ballot.
Well, I
I
think
think you can bring something up
Sure.
at the meeting, and that could possibly become a finding.
There you go. I think that's
But you couldn't write something down that has not been brought up by anybody at the meeting.
Well, I don't think I agree. Let's just take
Okay.
maybe it's a simple example and maybe too simple. Let's say that nobody brings up that it's a 2-lane road,
Okay?
okay? But everybody knows it's a 2-lane road. It's been a 2-lane road for 150 years, and nobody brings it up yet. You think that's important enough to check that last box and say,
Okay,
based
I
on
see
the
what you're
fact this is
saying.
a 2-lane road, well, how'd you know that? You learned that in here? Well, I saw it on the map, or,
Right.
again, back to the whole common knowledge
It's
thing.
probably mentioned in the staff report, though, too.
Could be. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that.
Okay. I'll open it up to anybody else that has questions.
The only other comment I would have is recall what the old ballots were.
Yeah.
The old ballots were 99% of the time taking too much time to be efficient. They were not necessary to take that much time to be lawful. And so what we're trying to do is to make it user-friendly for everyone, including members of the audience who are here waiting on cases, and to move through things expeditiously. So when you see something that you have a suggestion, let's make those changes as they come up. And the only
I
other thing that you and I were talking about is that Mr. Hiddle had indicated that there's going to be, I don't know whether it's funded yet, but he's going to ask the commissioners and council for funding for a review of all of our zoning matters in Tippecanoe County. This will be part of that. And so to the extent that there's time for you folks to weigh in, once that process started, that would be a good place to do it, because you're going to be, I don't think they've selected who's going to do it, but whoever does it is going to be an expert in this area and is aware of the best practices across the country.
Sounds good. Do we need, I mean, is it sufficient that we just say that staff's going to make the boxes bigger, use their discretion
I think
at that,
that-
so we don't need a motion? But does anybody have any problems with adopting this evening? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and take a voice vote. Or just, I'll just call for, all in
Voices.
favor of adopting? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? It's adopted.
Thank you. I think the next bullet point on the agenda is really perhaps a little bit of an amplification, but not much, on the amending the bylaws. You have in your packet some changes that I'm trying to remember. Is this the second time they've seen it?
These particular changes, no. These are really just cleanup items.
Just cleanup.
After the forms were adopted, we realized that the bylaws were in reference to the old forms. So a lot of these are strictly just cleanup items
Okay.
for the forms that have been adopted.
Okay, and so the intention is not to really change the bylaws except as necessary to make them conform to the forms that we've already approved.
Correct.
Thank you.
And I brought some of these up to Eric beforehand, but I guess I'll go ahead and take a
Yeah.
motion first
Good.
to adopt these, and then we can open discussion.
I move that we adopt the new bylaws as submitted in the packet.
Second.
Have a motion and a second, and questions. I can go ahead and start. I know we talked about the applicable filing fee as prescribed in these bylaws, and I don't think that, I think it's actually in the area plan bylaws, but I think Eric said that it might be good enough, just saying these bylaws.
The table is just in the APC bylaws, and I think you could tie it in pretty quickly with nothing more than a heading change on the table of dollar amounts.
And then the second question I had deals with the striking of the sentence. It says, "These owners of all property located adjacent and directly across the street, alley, or railroad right-of-way from, plus those within 200 feet of the property involved." Is that somewhere else in the bylaws?
So that's bottom of page 5.
Yeah, bottom of page 5.
And
How do we know if the applicant shall furnish all names and addresses of owners of property involved in the decision? How does the petitioner know, or the applicant know? And should that applicant also be changed to petitioner, like we have in other places?
You're referring to the AO appeal?
It's
On
page
page
5.
AO appeal, yeah.
Is that AO appeal? Oh,
Yes.
Okay, it is administrative office. It's their decision, yeah.
I don't-
And I recall that we had a different way of determining who the people would be receiving notice, but it was based on 500 feet? Was there a change there? Say it again.
For the
200, you think it was?
rezone actions?
And
Well, rezones, variances,
And BZA.
special exceptions, I think it's all,
Right.
it was changed, and does this need to mirror it, or is it because it's the decision of an AO that it's being appealed?
This is there because we're identifying who these people are, so it doesn't
The
need,
applicant.
the
Oh, okay.
applicant doesn't need to do
Okay.
that anymore.
Thank you. So yes, the applicant does not need to furnish these names. We are furnishing these names in response to them filing an appeal. So that's why it's struck out here.
And to whom do you send those? Who's on that list that we produce?
Right.
All of these people who are in the struck out words, yeah.
Well, it says here, the applicant shall also furnish the names in the sentence above what's being stricken out. Does that need to change?
Yeah, they're using applicant throughout that. It
Yeah,
looks
they
like.
only struck the back half of that sentence, not the front half. So the front
Right.
half is now incomplete and
Correct, that's,
illogical, so yeah. Okay.
I think we need to take this sentence back to the drawing board.
That, I believe, has to be in
Yeah.
there because they do, on all the petitions, have to say who the owners are. So that has to be.
The property involved in the decision.
If you like, we can bring this back next time
okay.
so that we're crystal clear, since largely David Hiddle, I think, did the edits here, and he's not here tonight to defend
And
his work.
most of the changes are excellent changes. I just
Yeah.
was questioning, but
We'll come back to you next time.
bring that back. Should we go ahead and continue this to our next meeting then?
You certainly can. You can take that by consent. You don't necessarily need
Yeah.
a vote unless you hear somebody against it.
I have consent to go ahead and continue this to the next meeting. So moved, so done.
And I think that concludes any discussion we have unless there are other questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'll go ahead and let's have the public hearing motion first, please.
I move that there be incorporated in the public hearing portion of each application be heard this evening and become part of the evidence at such hearing, the Unified Zoning Ordinance, the Unified Subdivision Ordinance, the Comprehensive Plan, the bylaws of the Area Board of Zoning Appeals, the application and all documents filed therewith, the staff report and recommendations on the application be heard this evening, and responses from checkpoint agencies.
Second?
Have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. I'll go ahead and take the continuances, please.
I move to continue BZA 2104 Archview Properties and BZA 2111 Tomish Developers LLC to the August 23rd, 2023 ABZA public hearing.
Second?
I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. If you're here for BZA 2104 Archview Properties, and that is south of Hawthorne Ridge and just north of the West Lafayette city limits in Wabash Township, or you're here for Tomish Developers, and that's a variance for a proposed multifamily apartment on Veterans Memorial Parkway West. Those will not be heard this evening. They'll be heard at our August 23rd meeting in 2 months. And at this point, I'd like to describe our procedures for this evening. Each case will be heard following a motion and a second from the board. We will ask the staff to report on its findings. Following the staff report, we will ask the petitioner to present his or her case, after which anyone wishing to support the petitioner's request for a variance or special exception will be asked to come forward. After hearing from the petitioner and those speaking on his or her behalf, you'll ask those speaking against the petition to speak or to present their arguments, and we do have a sign-up sheet as well for anyone that is not the petitioner that is speaking. The petitioner will then be allowed to rebut arguments raised by those in opposition to his or her petition. Following the rebuttal, the board may wish to ask questions of the petitioner's supporters and opponents of the petition or of the staff. The staff will have the opportunity at this time to make any necessary clarifying comments. We will then vote by use of a prescribed ballot. 4 votes are necessary to make any decision. In the absence of 4 votes, either for or against, the petition is automatically continued to the next meeting. Please observe the following guidelines for the sake of time and fairness to all. State your name and address for the record before you speak. Limit your remarks to 5 minutes or less. Do not repeat arguments that have been brought up by others. Remember that all visual aids used to support your arguments will remain the property of the board. Cell phones must be turned off while the meeting is in session. Please step out of the room before using your cell phone. With that in mind, we'll hear the first case.
I move to hear and vote on BZA 2108, Serious Solutions Cooperative. Petitioners requesting the following variance for a proposed expansion of an existing operation in a pending I-3 zone. It'd be number 1, to eliminate the buffer yard along the adjacent property zoned A to the west and south instead of the minimum required 15-foot wide buffer yard. That's UZO 4-9-3. Number 2, to eliminate the paving requirement for parking areas and maneuvering aisles, UZO 4-6-15. And number 3, to reduce the required parking standard from the minimum 28 spaces to 16, UZO 4-6-3. The 8.02 acre tract is located at 6601 South State Road 28 West, approximately 3,000 feet west of US 231 South near Romney. Randolph Township 19, Northwest 21-4.
Second.
I have a motion and a second, and we'll hear from staff. Amanda, please.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. So yes, this property is just west of Romney, as you can see here. It is a very rural area. It is surrounded by fields and large tracts of land with single-family homes on it. The nearest single-family home is just over 400 feet away from the property. It was rezoned, the east portion of this property was rezoned over a decade ago to I-3 to allow the use, which is a fuel distribution center for agricultural uses. They store fuel in the form of gasoline, diesel, propane, and kerosene. And as I understand it, it is currently self-served by their clients. Nobody staffs this site. Clients enter and fuel up and then leave. The rest of the site on the western side was recently rezoned just in the last month or two because the petitioner wants to expand their use on the site by adding an office building and a repair shop. So in order to do that, they needed to first rezone, and now they're here for a couple of variances because the I-3 zoning district does come with its certain development standards. So one of those standards is the requirement of a buffer yard when it is adjacent to agricultural zoned land, as it is to the west and to the south. This is a rural area, as I said. The use is for rural agricultural industries, so that's why it is ideal for this area. But unfortunately, that zoning does require certain development standards. The buffer yard is meant to protect less intense uses such as residential or smaller businesses from the heavier industrial that does occur in other I-3 zones. In this case, staff does not feel that a buffer yard is necessary to protect row crops from an office space and trucks entering and leaving the site on the east side here. The other development standard that is required in all industrial zones is to have paving for your parking and maneuvering aisles. Now, looking around the county, thinking about other rural agricultural uses, most of them are gravel, as is this one. The current use is all graveled, aside from the entrance at the road. Let me get a picture here of that. You can see just the entrance off the road is paved, but the rest of the lot is all graveled. And they just want to expand that gravel into their proposed addition. So from the site plan, you can see currently there is a couple of pole barns and then some outdoor storage of fuel tanks. As I said, trucks enter the site, they fuel up, and they leave again. The expansion would have more maneuvering aisles and backup areas for trucks, as well as some additional parking, because the new building will house an office where on the biggest shift there will be 12 employees. I say that because the parking standard is tied to how many employees are on site. So yes, the parking area and maneuvering aisles will be gravelled per the proposed site plan here, and that's what they're asking a variance for as well. Staff also finds this one supportable because, as I said, it is a rural use. The existing property is gravelled already, and just expanding it over here makes perfect sense in this rural area. The parking reduction that they are asking for is from 28, which is required, to 16. Now, with this one, staff just could not find a hardship because the property is sufficiently large enough to provide 28 parking spaces as the ordinance requires. We believe that with the buffer yard and the gravel parking, it would be a hardship to require the petitioner to put those in an area where it is already rural. But for the parking, we believe that it would not be a hardship for them to provide the required parking spaces here. So in terms of the variances, we have buffer yard, variance number 1, we would recommend approval. For variance number 2, for eliminating the need for paved parking and maneuvering aisles, recommend approval. And for variance number 3, for a reduction in parking, we are recommending denial. So I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Amanda. Petitioner is her representative.
Good evening. Chris Shellman of Gutwein Law, 250 Main Street, here on behalf of Ceres Solutions Cooperative. I also have with me several representatives of Ceres. If we have any questions, we'd like to thank the staff in helping us get to this point. It's been a little bit of a process, as some of you have been here might remember. A little bit of background and history. Staff mentioned that the site was recently rezoned for an expansion. The petitioner is actually purchasing 10 acres adjacent to its existing parcel. Not all of that 10 acres was rezoned. The county commissioners wanted, and the staff wanted to reduce the I-3 area to the portion that was needed, so only 4 acres was actually rezoned. That's what we plan on using. However, we will purchase all 10 acres, so our neighbor, our immediate neighbor, will be us. That context leads us to, most part of these requests. We also, with that guidance in mind, wanted to preserve as much farm ground as possible. In doing so, that leads us to not installing the buffer yards, which there's really no neighbors, and ultimately not providing parking that isn't needed. The ordinance requirement is based on the maximum shift, and for context, this site doesn't really have that many people that will always show up. The proposal is the existing facility is only a fueling, and the staff is correct in that it is only used for filling up trucks. No clients or customers come there to fill up trucks. They're all our trucks. They fill up and then take it out to the farm to fill up their customers. The new facility will be a 3,200 square foot office, so relatively small. It'll have 4 staff there that'll be there every day. But other than that, people will only be coming and going as they bring their truck to refuel, bring it to get maintenance, or potentially come for an all-hands meeting, potentially once a week. So that 12 maximum number is the most busiest day, all-hands-on-deck meeting that'll be for an hour or so. We would suggest that there'll be ample other stoned areas that would supply any surplus parking if it were needed. The maintenance facility will only be used to serve the maintenance trucks, so it's not a client or customer-centered area. We believe that our max will be 12, our use will be 12, and so we, with what we're requesting, will provide 4 extra in the off chance that a customer would pop in to pick up an extra quart of oil, some hydraulic fluid, or something like that. We believe this request is consistent with the direction to preserve the farm ground and is consistent with other agricultural uses in the area. we'd be happy to answer any specific questions, but ultimately, we think providing the extra parking in addition to all the other things would make us provide what's not needed and ultimately harm the area and make the use more inconsistent with the agricultural area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shulman. Anyone wishing to speak in favor of the petition? Anyone in opposition to the petition? Questions, comments? Go ahead, Robert.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the facility. Where's the actual fueling part of it?
On the east side, they're just steel cylinders.
Okay. And from what you were
Right
saying...
there.
Okay, so is there what type of fuel is being transferred there?
Diesel, gasoline,
And it's brought in by
propane over
your
there.
trucks and then carried out by your trucks?
correct.
And that's already existing?
Just take it
You guys are
through.
adding on the other part?
Correct, and the addition on the other parcel that we're purchasing and developing is not adding any of the fueling capabilities. It's a pole barn
Okay.
with office and some truck maintenance facilities to service our own internal fleet.
And then as far as the parking spaces go, you said that there'd be approximately 4 office staff, correct?
Correct.
And then you're going to be doing repair activities inside the building?
Correct.
What is the approximate staff for the repair facility?
One.
Heck of a mechanic.
Yeah.
Would there be, and you were mentioning about perhaps the sales of oil, things like that. Is this going to be a place where you're going to have some retail sales going on? You know, that the parking thing, if you'd have people come in to go ahead and buy things, is this going to be a retail facility where they could go ahead and pick up lubricants, et cetera, at the new space?
Only for customers, it's possible that that could occur, but very infrequent, less than 1 time a week on average. Most of it are large purchases and delivered to the actual customers in the field or at their shops. This is
Thank you.
not Napa.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, we've got 3 ballots.
All right, variance number 1 on the buffer yard. 6-0 in favor. Variance number 2 on the paving. Six, 0 in favor. Variance 3 on the parking. Four in favor, 2 against.
All 3 variances have been granted, and I like the short ballots.
It is short.
We'll hear the next case, please.
I move to hear and vote on BZA 2109, Scott Brown and Kaylee Birch Brown. Petitioner is requesting a special exception to allow a transient guest house operating 24 hours per day, 7 days per week, for a maximum of 6 guests in an R1B zone. The property is located at 1433 Franklin Street, Lafayette, Fairfield Township, Section 28 Southwest 23-4, with conditions and commitments.
Second?
Have a motion and a second. We'll hear from staff. Ryan, please.
All right. Well, as you can see, the site's zoned R1B, as is pretty much everything else around it. Definitely older part of the community, all built out. This home, along with a lot of the neighbors, these homes were built in the 1940s. It was purpose-built single-family residence. Franklin Street's a local road. You see that the site has, it's rear-loaded with alley, with the detached garage. Here's the site. I believe this is the site plan here, a long, skinny lot. And then here's a kind of exterior view from the alley and then from the street itself. So, leave it on the site plan. Obviously, the single-car garage does have access to that alley, and then there is a kind of a small gravel or space next to the garage where additional parking could be provided. The city indicated they're going to require that to be paved, can't be gravelled in the city, and so that would be taking place as well. Fairly straightforward case. The ballot items, the tests are met in staff's opinion, and so we are recommending approval with the conditions and commitments. Those conditions are a permit to operate the transient guest house must be obtained by the city, from their engineer's office, and then the parking space in the alley, or off the alley there, shall be hard surfaced, asphalt, concrete, whatever the city engineer approves. Then the commitments, the occupancy is limited to 6 guests maximum, and the dwelling may only be reserved by a single booking at any given time, so they can't double up in there or triple up or anything like that. So that's about it, so I'd be happy to answer any questions.
There was also one letter in opposition included in your packet.
Thank you. And we'll hear from petitioner, his or her representative. Opposition. No, petitioner first.
Petitioner comes first, then the public.
Well, we'll call on in a bit.
Good evening, Scott Brown, 1222 King Street. Yes, my wife and I are applying for this special exception to be used the property as an Airbnb. We live just 3 blocks away. I grew up in the neighborhood, my parents live in the neighborhood, and we still have family and friends that are in the neighborhood. We purchased the property in April of 2021 and remodeled it to be used as an investment that we could easily manage and maintain on our own, since we just live a few blocks away. After successfully renting, we have successfully rented the property for the past 18 months, but now that the tenant has moved up, we decided to try to Airbnb this one for a year to see what happens. We thought about doing another rental property as an Airbnb downtown, but we decided to do this one instead because of the proximity, can easily get back and forth. I did an inventory of the closest 53 properties surrounding the subject property, and approximately 24% do not have homesteads on the property. So 24%, I'm assuming, are currently rental. So this is not an uncommon thing to have rental properties in the neighborhood. On State Street, just a few blocks away, between Kossuth and 9th, there's actually an Airbnb, and I would assume most people don't even know that it's there. Again, as they stated as a condition, the county or the city is going to require to put a hard surface there. I believe we're going to try to get us to put an asphalt surface there. It is gravel, currently gravel, overgrown with weeds and grass, so it would be desirable to have that cleaned up anyway. And as you probably know, properties advertised on Airbnb sites are rated by the users. So it is in our best interest to keep the property in top condition and to attract the best users and high reviews for future short-term users. As an Airbnb, we'll be at the property much more frequently to address any interior or exterior maintenance and repairs. Most likely, we'll be there on a weekly basis and we'll manage this ourselves, so I will be there to mow. We'll be there to clean and do any repairs, maintenance on the inside and outside of the property. Our intent is to financially optimize the property so that we can make further improvements to the property, which will also benefit the values of the neighborhood. We will have security cameras, decibel monitor, and quiet hours at the property as proper precautions. We will provide our contact information to the surrounding property owners so that if there's any issues with short-term users, they can contact us so we can address any problems right away. We believe that this location of the property will most likely attract clientele that will be quiet and respectful of property neighbors versus the users who may be in town for a long, rowdy weekend. The only designated outdoor area for outdoor gathering is in the front porch. There is a large concrete front porch there, so maybe we'll have some chairs and table out there for people to sit and hang out. But we feel that because they're in visible view of all the neighbors, that they would be that would curtail any undesirable behavior from potential tenants. We do want to be good stewards of the neighborhood, so if after a year, if we are approved, if there are no financial benefits, or there are a large unacceptable amount of complaints by the neighbors, we would consider reverting the property back to a long-term rental. We also own, as I said before, own a property in downtown Lafayette. We've had it for 5 years. It was our primary residence at one time. We've had it rented for 5 years and had very good tenants so far. So we have been in the rental business prior to this property. And if you have any questions, I'd be feel free to answer any of them.
Thank you. We may have some for you later.
Yeah.
Anyone wishing to speak in favor of the petition? Now your turn. Anyone in opposition?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, board members. My name's Harold Adams. I live at 1504 Central Street in Lafayette, right around the corner from this property. I rise to speak in opposition to this request for variance at 1433 Franklin. I've lived in this neighborhood since 1971. This has been a total family-oriented area. You got the grandparents, you've got the middle-aged raising their families, you've got the younger people coming in, just getting ready to start their families, and this is a continuous operation there. And what I've seen, if you got somebody that's coming into a situation like this, over the course of time, you've got the possibilities for drug use, you've got the possibilities for loud parties, you got fights, things like this. If this would persist, that's a common nuisance, and this entails in law enforcement getting involved. And I'm speaking because I am a retired police officer, so I'm very familiar with the problems that arise in the neighborhood. Parking, that's a problem. If you got the trash out here, you got a loud party, and they've thrown everything out. We got families that walk their kids, walk their dogs. This is just a family-oriented area, and I speak against it. I urge you to vote against it. I'll stand for any questions.
We may have some for you later.
Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. And please sign the sign-in sheet. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the petition?
If we're in opposition, do we have to speak?
Basically
em-
everything he said.
Please come forward if you wish to say something.
So, I'm Brad, I'm at the house literally right next to it, but basically everything he said would be basically my testimony, and you guys said don't repeat it, so I wouldn't want to stand up here and repeat everything. But if I'm still in opposition, are we taking a vote, or basically just everything he said, or do I sign in, or?
We ask that you please sign in,
Okay.
but appreciate you signing it, or stepping up.
Yeah, that's
Because
fine.
even though you have the same concerns,
Yeah.
it does register with us, as far as the number of people that are opposed.
Okay.
And your
If
reasons.
if the person that lives with me is the co-owner, should they also sign?
And only if they wish to speak.
Okay.
Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition? Hearing none? Yeah. I was trying to get the guy's name. Mr. Brown, would you like to rebut? He didn't hear. Mr. Brown? Would you like to rebut? Please come forward if you wish to say anything.
I certainly do understand the concerns that were voiced about the violence and the rowdiness. I would say that if we kept it as a long-term rental, I would say I don't think that would change from a short-term rental. That being said, just 2 days ago, my wife had to call the police because there was a property on their side of the alley where there was an argument and threats being made. So I don't, and they're permanent residents, so I don't think that a short-term rental is going to attract that type of activity, but that's just my opinion.
Thank you. Questions, comments from the board? Gary?
Just the standard discussion that we kind of have, and since this has been a rental property and will be a rental property, whether it's an Airbnb or not, the challenge I have is deciding which one is better. And sometimes if you have a long-term rental and you have a tenant for a year and they're bad, or not the ideal tenant, they're sometimes hard to deal with, hard to get out of that situation. I know that the Airbnbs, sometimes you don't know. You can have a bad situation, but you do have a little bit more power to deal with an Airbnb, because besides getting a special exception from this board, they also have to get a permit or a license from the city of Lafayette. And so they're operating under this special exception, and they have rules to follow. And if those are not followed or kept, their special exception can be revoked. And then they have to do something else with the property. So as we hear these cases, that's the consideration. You think Airbnb is worse, maybe it is, depending on the location, but sometimes it can be better. That's one comment. The other comment was, I kind of talked earlier, in the zoning ordinance, there's a regulation for rental properties, I believe, which would apply to this Airbnb, that you can only rent to 3 unrelated people. We've kind of discussed that in the past. West Lafayette makes them aware of that when they get their license or permit, but I think we bring that up to either just make people aware that are operating the Airbnb, and also people in the neighborhood, that you can't just get 6 people in there that want to party, that if you operate under the rules, you can only rent to 3 unrelated people. Now, I'd like to hear some discussion whether we should actually put that in as a condition, or people are now aware of it. I'm not sure, but those are my comments. Thank you.
I know that West Lafayette, Chad said that they enforce that. I'm not sure what other jurisdictions and staff and our attorney, if they have any comments on that as well. Because I guess my comment is, it is a residential neighborhood, but it's really kind of a quasi-residential / business use. And, how does that fit in those those regulations, and whether or not the city of Lafayette would enforce something like that or not is another question. I know West Lafayette does.
Right, well, they both, there's only one definition of family, so all of the jurisdictions that have adopted the UZO have adopted that ordinance, and so therefore, the administrative officer would be in charge of enforcing it. So Lafayette would be in a position to be able to, should they choose to do so. If the AO has gotten evidence to that effect and wants to prosecute it, so to speak, issue a violation, zoning violation that could be appealed, I think West Lafayette just made it more explicit,
Right.
It's all the localities within our orbit have adopted the same ordinance. It's just West Lafayette kind of put an underline saying, we really mean this. It's just a gesture. It's just symbolic. So
it's really up to the jurisdiction to enforce, it's what you're saying. Unless we were
correct.
to make it a
And zoning
condition.
violations in our community are handled normally on a complaint basis, given typically by a citizen, complains to a city council person, what have you, or could be a police officer investigating something, and then there's something that's connected more to zoning as opposed to, criminal code. And so that would go to the zoning enforcement folks in Lafayette.
And so is it staff's opinion that that rule does apply, that this is a single unit and therefore only 3 unrelated, as opposed to being a business
I think
that is renting?
it's never been posed to our attorney to provide a legal interpretation.
Yeah.
So I think if you want to make it official, that's the route we go. So if you want my opinion, yeah, I think it actually does apply. But typically people going into Airbnbs, a lot of them are families.
Family
and it's
related.
by definition of some kind. So in that case, there's no limitation except their self-imposed limitation of 6.
Of 6, right.
So a family of 7 couldn't rent here, for example.
So,
But-
but you could, for instance, have, I don't know how you determine necessarily the 3 unrelated, but 3 couples that are married. I mean, you have 2, 2, and 2. Is that considered, I'm trying to figure out how you get 6 without having extended
Right.
family. Or is
Eric?
it, or does.
Do you want to give an
one-
on-the-spot legal
Yeah.
interpretation?
It used to be very clear before the state legislature passed the short-term rental legislation of, 8 years ago, 7 years ago. I think it's a little bit less clear, but I do know, speaking for West Lafayette and speaking about Lafayette, they do try and enforce that. On your example, the arithmetic problem, no more
Right.
than 2 unrelated, I think 3 married couples meet that standard. If I had a
Okay.
big whiteboard, I'd
Yeah.
do circles and pluses, but I think at least the way I would view that or
That
interpret that.
there's not more than 2 unrelated parties.
That's like 3 different people, because
Yeah.
each of the couples
To each.
are related.
Or one.
Or one person. Or one.
Right. Any other comments or questions about that? Go ahead.
I
Gary.
think with that discussion, just to make it clear, I would propose an amendment under commitments. Under number 1, occupancy shall be limited to 6 guests, comma, but no more than 3 unrelated guests. You could even say per the zoning ordinance, period.
I have a motion. Would anyone care to second?
Second.
And motion and a second. Any comments on this motion? I mean, it seems clear from both what staff has said and what our attorney has said, and our attorney's interpretation of it, that this would fall under that regulation in our zoning ordinance.
Right, which you could simplify and just cite the definition. It is in Chapter 1, definition of family. So you don't, if you just cite that, then you'll have your connection to the UZO, if you like.
Yeah, what's that specific? Do you have the specific site?
It's Chapter 1 of the UZO definitions. It's alphabetical.
The definition
so
of
it'll just be called
family.
under
It
F.
is, yes, more
And that's
clear.
where the three is
the
referenced.
three
yeah.
unrelated. But I think part of Gary's point was to make it clear that it was three unrelated parties, rather than citing the definition that people would have to go search for.
That's fine.
So, I mean, either way, but I think, and go ahead, Gary.
And I even talked to staff of maybe in the future, we might even put that in there as a commitment, if, instead of having to adopt it each time, since it is in the ordinance, and still that's changed, I think that's what they would have to operate under.
So just like a standard commitment with these sorts of things. I get you.
Like you
Right.
say, occupancy, and then the standard three unrelated.
Yeah, that sounds
for the
reasonable.
definition. And with that, I wondered if Mr. Brown has any comments on that, if he was aware of that. If you don't have any comments, that's fine, but,
Yeah, we would like to hear from you.
yeah.
It's a two-bedroom home. We plan on putting 2 queen beds in there. Our intent for the 6 people is if we have traveled quite a bit and used Airbnbs with other couples, so if you have 2 couples, maybe one of them has 2 kids, maybe has 1 kid, and the other place to sleep would be a pull-out couch in the living room. So that's why we put it at 6. I'd be perfectly happy with the 3 unrelated verbiage in there if that was requested.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments about the 3 unrelated commitment change?
When they get the permit to operate the transient guest house, do they have to agree to follow the rules and have 3 unrelated when they're getting a permit?
Yeah, it's part of the permit.
So you don't, okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if that it explicitly states that,
You wanna
though.
tell them?
They also cannot get that permit until they have recorded that commitment. So the AO is aware of the requirement to record and won't issue that permit until it's done.
Okay.
One other
Go ahead.
question for staff.
But is this about the 3 unrelated? or-
No.
Let's go ahead and take care of the 3
Okay,
unrelated,
good
because we
point.
have a motion and a second and discussion on that. Any other comments on the 3 unrelated? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That commitment has been modified
And
for the
more-
3 unrelated rule.
Okay.
And any other comments about,
Just procedural, hearing Mr. Brown's comments about trying it for a year, and then if it doesn't work out, he may go back to a traditional rental. If a special exception ceases its use for more than a year, is that special exception then considered expired?
That is correct.
or it's considered abandoned?
Abandoned.
Yes.
Thank you. Abandoned. So just wanted to make him aware of that. If he ceased for a year, he would no longer could operate under that. Thank you.
You'd have to come back for another special exception. Any other comments on this? Hearing none, we've got a ballot. Just go ahead and pass it. That way you can look at them. That way you can look at them. He's got them all.
The 6 ballots are all in favor, 6-0.
Special exception has been granted, and we'll hear the next case, please.
I move to hear and vote on BZA 2110 Buckingham Properties LLC. Petitioners requesting the following variance for a proposed multifamily apartment complex currently known as the Platte at Yeager Road in an R3 zone. Number 1, to reduce the required parking standards for the proposed Lot 1 from the minimum 2 spaces per dwelling to 1.3 spaces per dwelling unit. UZO 2-8-11. Number 2, to reduce the required parking standard for the proposed lot number 2 from the minimum 2 spaces per dwelling unit to 1.7 spaces per dwelling unit, UZO 2-8-11. And number 3, to increase the maximum building height from 39 feet as measured from the peak of the roof to 48 feet, UZO 2-8-10. The property is located east of Hadley Moore subdivision on the west side of the future realigned Yeager Road, north of West Lafayette city limits, and Wabash 36 southeast 24-5.
Second?
Have a motion and a second, and staff, Amanda, please.
Thank you. So yes, this property is located just north of West Lafayette city limits. It recently underwent a rezone just in the last month or two to R3, which is multifamily. And as you can see, most of the surrounding areas are residential. You have the Hadley Moores subdivision just to the west. It's a single-family subdivision. The rest of this is largely undeveloped and is still in row crops. Let's see here. The petitioners have submitted a sketch plan for this. It will be a multifamily, multi-building subdivision with 2 proposed lots. So that is why there are 2 separate variances for parking, because we are talking about a different ratio on Lot 1 as opposed to Lot 2. From the site plan that they have submitted, it shows the multiple buildings around the perimeter of the property with parking on the interior. This property will be bounded by the Yeager Road extension. You know, once it extends here to the north and then rounds out the north end of the property. And then Roundtree here, I'm not sure if it's going to be named Roundtree when it extends, but it will be connected to Roundtree down here to the south.
I think it's Round Table.
Round Table, sorry. Roundtree rolls off my tongue better. All right. So the parking standard for this use for multifamily in the county is 2 spaces per dwelling unit. With the proposal in place here, they have a total of 446 units, which would require 890 parking spaces. They are providing 655 parking spaces total, which is 74% of the required here. Staff has recognized and stated multiple times in the past that the parking standard is outdated and has led to a lot of parking lots that go unused in our county. Staff is happy to support the developer in this decision of providing what they feel is sufficient for their proposed residences here. In addition to the fact that City Bus they provide service in Hadley Moores over here already, and they're talking with the developer as part of the subdivision process to make sure that they can provide sufficient service for the future residents of this subdivision as well. So public transportation will be readily available to people should they choose to use it. So staff is in support of both of the parking variances. You have 2 of them, 1 for each proposed lot. As for the height requirement, R3 is the highest density for residential in the county. The maximum requirement, or the maximum allowed height in the R3 zone is 35 feet as measured to the peak of the roof. However, when the setbacks on all sides exceed the requirement, they gain additional height. So it's 2 feet per each additional 1 foot of setback over the required setback limits. So they do exceed the setbacks on all sides by at least 2 feet. They have gained 4 feet in height per the UZO. So their variance is from 39 feet instead of 35. That is what the motion was in this case. I just wanted to explain that here for you all. And they're requesting 48 feet for a total. In this case, the 48 feet would not be right at the edge of the building. It would be recessed into the interior. You know, the peak of the roof would be where the maximum height of 48 feet would be. And I believe the UZO, the intent of, a maximum height requirement for these buildings is to make sure that you don't have a huge imposing structure right against a street or against a sidewalk. And in this case, staff feels that it is a reasonable request to go from 39 to 48 feet. However, we just could not find a UZO-defined hardship in this case because, the petitioner could build a building with 3 feet up to the 39 feet maximum allowed here. So this would be a practical hardship maybe to get the buildings that they desire, but not a UZO hardship. So in regards to the variances, we are recommending approval for both of the parking variances, number 1 and 2, but we are recommending denial for the variance number 3 in regards to the height. There was a letter in opposition to this case included in your packet, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Amanda. Petitioner, his or her representative.
Ryan Munden with Reiling, Teeter, and Schreier here on behalf of the petitioner, Buckingham Properties LLC. We concur with staff's report and recommendation with respects to the ballot items for variance 1 and 2 for reduced parking, so I won't repeat what's already been said. With respect to those, with respect to the third variance, we concur with staff's report. With respect to ballot items 1 through 3, however, we disagree with the remaining items as well as their recommendation. The terms of the zoning ordinance are being applied to a situation that is not common to other properties. As mentioned, the Jaeger extension is going through this property. It reduces the setback available to us to utilize that UZO section 4-5 increase in height based on setback. The Jaeger extension cuts off an entire corner of this property. Without that Jaeger extension, we could otherwise achieve the height that we're asking for a variance for. So without that extension, we wouldn't be asking for a variance. So the situation is not common to other properties or to this property, given that unique situation with the extension. Strict application of the terms of zoning ordinance will result in unusual and unnecessary hardship. Again, we could have achieved that height, but for the Jaeger extension being imposed on us. It's not self-imposed. It wasn't our idea to extend Jaeger Road. And the variance does provide only the minimum relief to alleviate the hardship. Staff commented that the minimum relief would be the 39 feet permitted by the ordinance, which is essentially saying minimum relief would be to not request a variance at all. Staff also acknowledged in its comments on ballot item 2 that the proposed height is for a slightly taller building, which we would agree with. Also stated in staff report that it does not go against the nature of the ordinance restrictions and is a moderate and reasonable deviation from the ordinance. Finally, during sketch plan, we did receive comments from APC staff recommending that we add a 4th story. So APC, while they find no hardship, has asked that we go denser and higher than even the height that we're asking for here. So we found that to be interesting. So again, we are requesting minimum relief because we are asking for something we would have otherwise been entitled to, but for Jaeger extension, and we're asking for less than what APC has recommended during sketch plan. So with that, we would respectfully request your approval and be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the petition?
Good evening. My name is Kent Parkinson, and I live at 5516 West, 1200 South in the Brookston area. I've been a resident of Tippecanoe County and White County my entire life. I grew up in West Lafayette. I went to high school there, and I graduated from Purdue University with 2 degrees. The property in question here has been in the Parkinson family for 60 years. It is now owned by the Parkinson Family Trust, of which myself and my 2 younger brothers are beneficiaries of. As a young man, I farmed this property with my family. It's a very nice piece of property, gently rolling, and is ideal for development of this type, particularly in consideration of its proximity to the Purdue Research Park, Purdue University, and the surrounding county, as well as West Lafayette. While I'm a little disappointed to see something go from agriculture to development, I also recognize the need for Purdue, West Lafayette, and the county to continue to grow. There are some exceptions here, as you've heard earlier this evening, but this is a keystone property along with some of the other properties that are being proposed in the area, to really set a standard for what can bring in continued prosperity for this part of the county. I've been very fortunate in my career to have traveled through many parts of North America as well as around the world as a consultant, and I've seen many properties of this type. Most notably, you may be familiar with the Research Triangle down in North Carolina. That situation there has property similar to what Buckingham is proposing here, which is to bring in young professionals or seasoned professionals that may not want to purchase a house, but may want to rent or lease a property for either a short or a relatively long period of time. This is the type of property that will bring in professional people of that type. It's the type of property that will help fuel further research and that sort of development for Purdue University, West Lafayette, Lafayette, and the entire county. Things change, and this is a property which is invoking change for the betterment of the overall county area. One of the unique things that I've learned in my travels is that this entire community here is relatively recession-proof. And one of the reasons for that, it's a technology sector because of Purdue University and the types of businesses which are in the area that support Purdue University and industries such as Caterpillar and other international companies here. So I would ask the board to give careful consideration to what Buckingham, a well-respected and leader in this sort of development, who has the expertise and experience to put good projects like this together that will be a showcase for the area. My brothers and I are in favor of this. My parents always felt, as West Lafayette and Purdue were moving out to this property, this would be an ideal place for a keystone type of a property to kind of set the standard for what development in this part of the county could look like. I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. I'll answer any questions if you have any.
Okay, thank you. Sir, if you could go ahead and sign, even though, because you're not the petitioner. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the petition? Anyone in opposition to the petition? Questions, comments from the board? Go ahead, Robert.
I have a question for the petitioner. You spoke about the Yeager Road extension. Was the Yeager Road extension announced before you went to the drawing boards on this? Was it after? Did they take it from eminent domain from this property? You're saying if you had that but for the Yeager Road extension, you would meet the setback requirements. Timeline-wise, when did this all occur? Because if the Yeager Road extension was already announced, you guys knew about it.
If I recall correctly, and Nathan, correct me if I'm wrong, when we started talking about this project, the extension was being discussed, but it was not in its current form or location, is that right? I forget what the previous iteration of it was, but it was not that. I believe it was, I don't know how to describe it, it was in reverse, right? It was, I believe it cut through that empty area there to the west, yeah.
Can you go ahead and give your name and
Yeah,
address?
Nathan Harris, Buckingham Companies, 941 North Meridian Street, Indianapolis, Indiana. Ryan's correct. When we first initially got the property under contract, the right-of-way for Yeager was not yet purchased. We found out about the plan and proposal for the road during the course of, getting the property under contract ready for development. Also, another fact, our engineer just pointed out to me, I forgot about this, Ryan, during our sketch plan process, staff did request an additional 5 feet of right-of-way along Jaeger. I believe the current right-of-way width is 70 feet total, 35 feet each way, but thoroughfare plans call for 40. So we've given up an additional 5 feet of right-of-way, which actually pushes our setback, further into the property by that 5 feet as well. So there's been some hardships kind of imposed throughout the course of the project. We'd already had our building set, plans in place, and then we decided to go ahead and relinquish that additional 5 feet to comply with the thoroughfare plan to provide that right of way to the county. So we're just requesting a slight modification to the height to account for some of those things.
Thank you. I do have a quick question. I noticed that the map that we have and the map that's there are not identical. That one hits the property line of where the variance is, hits the corner of the property, and there's a good distance here on the one that's in the...
I can answer that as well.
Okay.
When we initially drew everything, the line that you see there was kind of determined based on drainage. Our initial meetings with the county surveyor proposed kind of a relocation of the legal drain, which would kind of be more of a stream kind of a thing. Additional talks and conversations with them, the decision was made that a pond would be better. So that line kind of goes through the pond. There aren't any buildings that would be impacted by that, but that's why the shape's a little different. There's a change in the site plan due to some negotiations with the...
Right here, there's a big distance between this here. I think you're talking about the pond up here.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
But this distance here, and that map shows it hitting the corner.
Correct, yeah, there was some inconsistencies with the exact alignment of the extension of Round Table from Hadley Moore. The exact alignment of that road was undetermined when we're going through the rezone process. Again, there were some things kind of in play with where the road would be. We're trying to fit in our site plan.
I'm assuming this is the map that's correct.
Correct, yes.
So not the one that's up on the slide that's up on the...
So this is the rezone area, but the actual site plan that you guys have is correct.
Okay.
Correct, yeah.
So there's an area that was rezoned that was larger than
Correct.
the actual site.
Yeah, we think it's the rezone legal description. That's the only thing
That makes sense.
that's been measured essentially, because nothing's been platted, as far as I know. So, right.
And I do have a question as to what is planned on the other side of the extension of Round Table. Is there any thoughts? Is it apartments? Is it houses?
It would be additional residential, most likely not apartment buildings. It could be townhomes or maybe some single-family rental, but that's not been determined. But it would be additional residential.
Okay. I'm just trying to get a feel if there's, how close like single-family houses would be, but it'd be on the other side of the road.
Other side of the road or other side of a pond. Yeah.
Or other side of the pond, yeah. Thank you. Any other questions? Robert? Oh.
I had a question for staff. You guys came out, makes the statement about we have outdated parking restrictions, but yet they're not changed, so apparently whoever has the ability to change them has not felt it's something to be done yet. But when we go ahead and take a look, and there was a comment made about all these unused parking spaces, have we actually done a scientific investigation to how many, because I really don't see that many unused parking spaces. When it gets towards the university, because of the type of tenant that you'd expect, there I could see different things. Out here, I'm sorry, I forget the gentleman that spoke, the property owner, but he was saying that it was going to be more professors, people looking for longer term. You're farther away from the university. How are you guys determining that this is enough? Because I really don't see all these empty parking spaces.
Well, definitely staffs, the current complement and then previous staffs have, been monitoring parking. I mean, obviously we have tons of case studies of, projects of, varying occupancy levels that we can draw from. And then we routinely go through, especially with planned development projects, we'll scan other projects and, poll other communities and, try to put our kind of thumb on the pulse of what's going on in like peer communities like ours relative to parking. Because there's no crystal ball, there's no magic formula that, yeah, this is it, this will do it. Every community is a little different. So we have this parking standard from the 1998 ordinance that has persisted to this day. And we get variance requests, I'd say fairly routinely. It's not, you guys don't get parking variances every month, but we do get a fair amount of them. And, I think the coming Unified Development Ordinance effort that is kind of looming next year, that's going to be very high on our wish list in terms of addressing parking. To kind of have some expert advice from the outside that could maybe give us some, tips and hints on what would be an ideal parking situation based on the type of use and the density and its location relative to like the urban centers. So changes are definitely going to be coming. We've been wanting to do this for a while, but I think given the effort, there's not an emergency need, to rush something through, and we haven't had any of our localities specifically ask us via resolution to please address parking. You need to lower it because we're having a parking problem. None of our cities or towns or the unincorporated county have specifically asked that via their elected officials. If they did, we'd get on it immediately. So if there is staff sometimes brings these issues up, and usually before our ordinance committee, that's where we kind of talk about big picture concept before we move forward on anything. But we really haven't had any, any big drive to do this, but to really examine the parking standards and then try to make them more efficient. But definitely my strategy moving forward is, with the Unified Development Ordinance process that we're going to try to initiate next year, which is essentially to fuse the zoning ordinance with the subdivision ordinance into one more efficient book. That parking and height will certainly be looked at because these are common variances, especially with multifamily projects. And we'll likely use projects in the ground now that have done via planned development will likely inform our decisions, because these are projects that are in the ground now, fully leased. They've been running for a good number of years, and they've got kind of stories to tell on what is an efficient level of parking. And so I think we would certainly be well within our rights to adjust those limitations based on that kind of hard evidence. And we have accumulated that and kept logs of it, and so it's going to, when we're ready, we'll definitely pull the trigger on it. But so I would say, it's coming, and I think the objective will be to reduce variances. And honestly, the sort of variance requests we get is also evidence, because they're not the only ones. Others have done it too, and so you can start to see trends about what people are asking for in terms of reductions, and so that'll also play a part in a zoning ordinance rewrite.
Well, because the other thing is that if they're replotting this, it's in two lots. One of them, there's different parking regulations, and when it's two separate lots, that means at some point, I guess anything could be divided, but it could be sold as, why two lots when they're they're redoing this? So it means that something could be sold off. So you might have two different complexes, and yet we're giving variances to either one. We haven't done any type of studies, nor has anybody requested as you said, from a city standpoint, to redo the parking regulations.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, so, so ultimately, you'll have to take all this information and then, cast your vote accordingly. But yeah, you're right. If they could technically sell this off and then somebody else could develop the other half. And so that's certainly consideration and that's really all you need to consider at this point, in my opinion, as staff, is just that this project in isolation, as if it was by itself forever, is it self-sufficient relative to parking? Given the amounts that they want to lower it to. The zoning ordinance has a certain standard. Staff's been on record saying that, yeah, it's typically pretty high. And in our observations, a lot of those spaces do go empty. Is it everywhere? No, but, just from working and being here, we see that. And as well as the variance requests that we get for lowering parking standards. And so we just kind of relay all that information to you. But for our purposes as staff, we have the tests that the state imposes on us for variance requests, and it either meets the test or it doesn't. And then we'll offer that opinion to you as well, so.
Can I add to that real quick on the standard? Go ahead. The UZO standard for parking just says 2 per dwelling unit, but it doesn't differentiate based on unit mix. So for example, this project has a high number of studios and 1-bedrooms, which would require 2 parking spots. But if somebody is living there alone, there'd be no need for 2 parking spots. In addition, young professionals that are looking for an apartment before they buy a house, it's not uncommon that they want a 2-bedroom so they can turn the 2nd bedroom into an office. So this type of project, again, it wouldn't be uncommon to see one occupant of a 2-bedroom, and again, they'd only need 1 car. So that unit mix isn't taken into account in the parking standard, which I'd hope we would take into account when we amend it, so.
Right.
I'm in favor of growth in all the areas, and I like to see projects like this come up. I just think that we have to, because there's ordinances, we have to make sure that this growth is done in a correct manner and in a correct way.
Right. And outside of that 2 per unit standard, which is common in the unincorporated county and the towns, I believe, and in most of West Lafayette, City of Lafayette has actually an alternative lower standard citywide that only applies to their jurisdiction, and that just developed over time, and it's something that they were comfortable with. And then there's a university proximate area that has an alternative lower parking standard as well, that West Lafayette has, dealt with for, a long time. No, not say dealt with, they've, embraced it. So we do have areas that in mostly the urban core areas where we have these lower standards as a matter of right for a developer, and it seems to be working out. And so, but not so for the outer county area.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Last chance for questions. If not, we've got 3 ballots.
All right, variance number 1 on the parking for Lot 1 is 6-0 in favor.
Is that 6-1?
Did I say 6-0? What did I say?
You said, I thought you said 6-1, it was 5-1.
I meant 6-0.
Oh, it is 6-0? Okay.
What did I say, folks? For variance number 1. Ah, thank you. Good for you. 1, 2. It is, I apologize, 5-1 in favor on Lot 1 on parking. On Lot 2 on parking, variance number 2. That is 5-1 in favor. And for variance 3, on the building height, that is 5-1 in favor.
All 3 variances have been granted. Unless any member has an objection, the chair will order the findings of each member casting a vote for the majority decision of the board to be the collective findings of the board in support of the decision of the board. Hearing none, it is so ordered. Administrative matters?
We have none.
And I just would like to thank Gary for bringing up the issue with the 3 unrelated that had come up before.
You're welcome, but I think you brought it up first,
That's true.
which I didn't think about a couple cases ago, so we finally got here.
And I'll take the final motion.
Move to adjourn.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Isn't it though? Oh, that was sweet. Oh, we can make cards. It'll have both your pictures on it. Big seller. Big seller. I think this outfit pays attention. That's what I think. They correct the ballot counter, they discuss weighty development kind of issues. I mean,
Yeah.
all on top of it. How are you, Dustin?
Good.
Yeah, what?
This conference is no longer being recorded.